Welcome to Down to Business with V, a show dedicated to bringing you actionable information to help you, your families, your businesses, and the community. I'm your host V, and today we're bringing you AI's impact on Hollywood and the entertainment industry. We've called in a director and co-founder of a creative consulting firm to share use cases, discuss the integration of AI and new technology in film and entertainment. And as always, we'll share what to do if you're a victim of fraud. Stay tuned for that and more. Let's get down to business. From Atlanta, Georgia, to becoming a United States Marine, to Washington, D.C., and every place in between, everybody calls me V. My goal is to bring you resources, education, and knowledge from sources you can trust, that informs and protects to safeguard our families, our businesses, and the community. Now let's get down to business. Welcome to Down to Business with V. I'm your host V, and today we're discussing AI's impact on Hollywood and the entertainment industry. We have in the studio with us via Zoom Suki Madawi, director and co-founder of Bell & Whistle. Suki Madawi is a commercial director and technology consultant based in LA, helping professionals integrate AI into their daily lives and transform their work through generative thinking. Suki has worked with companies like Google and Sony on programs ranging from media strategy and curriculum design to trauma-informed documentary subject frameworks. Her award-winning work debuted at Sundance 3 years in a row and can be seen on Netflix, HBO, Showtime, The New York Times, TED, and more. Let's take a look at our interview with Suki. Suki, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us.
It's a joy and a pleasure and an honor to be here.
I am ecstatic to have you. So Suki, listen, let's talk a little bit about your background. You've done so much. Directing, filmmaking, consulting, AI. Tell us how all of this came to be.
Absolutely happy to tell you my life story. I'm going to condense it though, just a little bit.
Okay.
So I worked in production for 10 years, specifically nonfiction and branded content. And I fell in love with documentary, specifically cinematography, and it ended up focusing on that sort of towards the end before the pandemic hit. And I ended up pivoting to directing really when I made a short film that got into a lot of festivals and won a few awards. And I was like, maybe I can do this. And so I ended up really working primarily in, it's kind of in that interface of like, started working in the intersection between branded content, documentary, and commercials. And that's what I'm doing today in film. But with AI, generative AI found me while I was on a writing sabbatical. I was working on a short film script in the high Atlas Mountains of Morocco, actually sadly near the epicenter of where the earthquake hit, but we were staying in this really beautiful riad that was overlooking the mountains, and I ended up seeing one day that DALL-E 2 was released, and after that it was a snowball of like Midjourney, Stable Diffusion, Runway, all of these different apps that were starting to showcase text to image generators. And so for those who aren't familiar, it's basically you put in a prompt and then an image appears. And it was, I had played with some of these tools before, but this was the first time that I saw it in mass and something that I could access really easily. And even from this remote village, even though the generations took so long, it really caught hold of me and I became obsessed. So I started a newsletter, I started a podcast, I sent it to all my friends. And that ended up connecting me to The New Yorker, who wanted to bring me on as a director for a piece about ChatGPT when it launched in December. And even though the project itself was canceled, we worked for a few months on it, and it got me connected to Runway, where I spoke at their AI Film Festival with Darren Aronofsky and Paul Trillo and Cleo Abrams. And that really just opened up this doorway of speaking and connecting with people about AI on a level that I hadn't really anticipated. And the rest is history.
Yes, it is. And you know what? That piece of history is what led me to you. You and I met at a convention in Hollywood in LA, And you were talking about the things we're talking about today. Generative AI, how it's being used in film and media. Talk to our audience and share a little bit about what you shared there, because it was so fascinating, Suki, what I saw, that even during your presentation, I didn't know whether to text my technology advisor or like stare cold at the screen. What you did was absolutely expert, amazing. The things that we had been saying in my consulting practice, the things that we had been saying could be done, you had executed expertly. So tell our audience a little bit about what you did, yes ma'am, and how you used AI to generate like every part of that production process.
So for me, when I was approached to speak at Realscreen, it was an interesting challenge because I was really trying to think about what is the most important thing for me to communicate in 5 minutes to an audience of people that may or may not have had any kind of exposure to AI or really deep exposure to AI. And one of the things that became very clear to me is that I keep hearing the same questions over and over again at different events and different teams that I work with, and that is specifically the questions: what tools should I be using, and how do I use them? And I've constantly thought to myself, like, these are not the right questions to be asking. And even though they are helpful later on in the process, we really need to kind of move back a few steps and start to ask a bigger picture question, which is, for me, what system can I design that allows me to use less tools, to use them better, and to think generatively? Um, and and to break that down a little bit and make it a little less complex, I like to think of AI tools as ingredients in a recipe where the tools I choose are critical, but how I choose them and what how I put them together and in what order are just as important. And so I like to break down the process by starting with, like, what big picture end results I'm looking for, what are the milestones, and what is the most graceful path that I can take to arrive there, um, before I actually start to use any of the tools or create a process, whether it's generating or prompting, whatever it is. Um, it's very experimental, and it comes down to a systems design thinking approach, which is what I presented on stage, which was really like uh, an approach to AI, to generative tools that is not reliant on any one tool. And while, I shared a bunch of tools that I use through various parts of the production process, from pre-production, production, and post-production, I really wanted to drive home to people that before you ever start using AI, it's so important to imagine the goal, work backwards, gather materials, start to design the structure of how you're going to contain the findings, almost like a research project, before you ever start to generate. And then in generating, recognizing it's an iterative process, it's a conversation with AI. And so very grounded in practice. I'll tell you a little bit for, like, let's say unscripted production. One of the things that I do for pre-production is I want to navigate through interview transcripts. So you have these like pages and pages and pages of someone talking about any number of issues. And I could, like I did before in my days of, my decade of working in documentary, scroll through and be like, oh, what did they say? Was it on this page? Or I could use ChatGPT and a plugin on ChatGPT to search for what are all of the instances that this person has talked about X. And it'll give me a list of them. So all of a sudden, it almost helps me focus my palette so I can think about things as I'm constructing an edit or constructing a story. Something else I'll use is a Pickaxe, which is another sort of application of ChatGPT, for sort of story development. I know the founders, and it's a wonderful tool for thinking about sort of interacting with a bot and character bots to help you really get your brain around storytelling and story development. So that's for pre-production, and for example, mood boards or pitch decks, I'll use a variety of tools to get visual inspiration. There's Midjourney, where you can type a prompt in and it'll create an image for you. It's really beautiful. I've also used Runway and Pika for video generation, and they've, even since that talk, they've become really advanced in a lot of the different ways that you can manipulate images. I'm a part of their creators program, the First Wave, and it's really, really cool what you're able to do within generating an image, and then you can get it to zoom in or zoom out or rotate to the right or the left. And like that kind of creativity just didn't exist many years ago. You'd have to sort of go through the internet and find all of these different things. And here you can really just ask it to create an image that will help you communicate what your vision is to any of your collaborators. So there's many others, from post-production to like post-production audio to actual production, where I'm using NeRFs. I don't know if you know about what those are, but I'm using NeRFs for the first time, which are essentially like frozen scans of space where AI kind of fills in the blanks. I'm using it for a branded piece right now that I'm directing, where we're trying to showcase the experience of trauma. And rather than doing a recreation, we're showing a frozen moment where this woman is remembering her past, and we're using really creative camera movements we did in post to sort of give you a feeling of like disorientation. And for me, that feels like a really honorable way to tell a story around trauma that isn't just like exposing it like a raw nerve. And so there's all of these different creative tools that are allowing us to tell stories in even deeper ways. And so during that talk, I was talking about and sharing the various tools that I use in these chapters of production that really can help any storyteller.
Yeah, and so you were at the Cannes Film Festival and moderated several panels. Tell us about some of the feedback that you got from the other experts in the industry that are using the software in different ways.
Yeah, that was such a fun event. So, who was it? So it was Paul Trillo to put together this really amazing day of panels. I moderated both the creatives panel and also the diversity and inclusion panel, and so had a really wonderful range of perspectives from the artists working with these tools and also those who are advocating for these tools in larger ethical advocacy sort of positions. And so the creatives panel was with Paul Trillo, who's a director with Art Class, Alexia Adana, who's the VP and creative director for Edelman, Don Allen Stevenson, who's a XR advisor and AI futurist. He's awesome. Nathan Shipley, who is the director of AI at the time at Goodby Silverstein and Partners. He's kind of doing his own thing now. And then Josephine Miller, who is an XR art director and co-founder of OR Studio. And they all had very interesting, unique, rich perspectives on how they use AI. It was mostly a conversation where it sort of bounced around from different folks, echoing each other's points of views, diving in to maybe topics that weren't talked about as often. And some of the things we talked about were how these new tools have given us all a lot of freedom to create with a new feeling of agility and speed and playfulness that we might have lost a little bit in the job. And we talked about the democratization of creativity, real world problem solving with AI. Alexia was talking about how she literally reimagined herself as the main character of different films. And so it's really like being able to see yourself as these characters and like talk about identity politics shifting, where you can sort of imagine yourself as a person in a role that you would have never maybe seen yourself as. Daisy chaining multiple AI tools, which is basically like taking one and tagging it onto another and creating basically a recipe of different AI tools that work together. We talked about seeing AI as a storytelling partner that allows us to expand our own imagination. For example, with ChatGPT, there's a DALL-E plugin which allows you to do image generation, but you can also ask it to tell stories. And so you can say like, we're in an elevator on the 14th floor. This is something that Paul Trillo was talking about, that he was using it as a story partner, where he was giving it the context for the beginning of a story and asking it to finish it. And then he would take what it gave him and go to like the next phase of the story. And it almost becomes like if you're telling a bedtime story, it's like a bedtime story partner. You're kind of jumping from one edge to another. And then finally, we really talked a lot about ethics, the ethics of creativity, the ethics of choosing to essentially regulate yourself and recognize what are you comfortable with in terms of how you prompt, whether you use artists' names or not, what you think about using, how you think about using these tools, knowing that they have been trained on artists' data and artists' images, exploring ethics with a human first perspective, and also not being afraid to experiment all of the time and reiterate on your processes all of the time, so that we can push the envelope for what's possible, but also not lose sight of the implications of what we want to bring forward to humanity, which is like mindfulness and thoughtfulness and
Yes.
ethical process.
Yes. And you know, those ethics are so important. Suki, you guys did a deep dive there, and when we come back, we're going to talk more about AI and its impacts in Hollywood and on entertainment and how you can implement them for your business. We'll be back. Welcome back to Down to Business with V. I'm your host, V, and today we're talking about AI's impacts on Hollywood and entertainment. And I have back with me Suki Madawi. Suki, welcome back.
Hello, thank you very much. Good to be back.
Yes, we have been having an amazingly interesting conversation about how AI is being implemented in certain areas in production in Hollywood. And we've also been talking about looking at some ways that, you know, the everyday business owner can use these products and tools in their businesses. One of the things that stood out most to me, and I said, you know what, I'm using this in my consulting practice as well, is how we could use AI to help us when we're looking at things like contracts and getting some feedback from the AI on how we can make those better and negotiate in our favor. Tell us about that.
So, I found in the early days when I was being given contracts for any number of jobs as a freelancer, you're having to negotiate a lot of these contracts yourself. And I'm sure there's a lot of people that don't really want to pay for a lawyer to have to look over all these contracts, but you have to in order to make sure that you're doing your due diligence. And I thought to myself, once I got a contract, I wonder what would happen if I just like copied and pasted text from the contract into ChatGPT and asked it to explain it like I was five. And it was so helpful.
Wow.
Because in many ways, it sort of distilled the gibberish, the legalese.
Yes.
But for me, I'm a smart person, but I do feel like it's designed to confuse me. And so I was able to throw it into a system that very mindfully helped me understand what this company was trying to do, what rights it was trying to keep, what rights it was giving me. And it allowed me to understand the contract first and foremost. Second, I asked it, you know, in what ways, based on my interests as this person, in what ways could I make this contract better? And what would actually improve it, like in my favor? And it gave me a bunch of examples. And I said, sort of put it into the same language as the contract. And it did it. And so I was able to not only understand what they were saying and what they were trying to get at, but also think about new terms that would be helpful for me and then put it into language that I could send back to them to say, like, this is what I would want. And it made me feel a lot more confident that I knew what this contract was about.
Absolutely. And you know what I love? You talked about, you know, having to rely on legal experts, attorneys, lawyers. It helps you to even dialogue with them in a more educated way.
Yes.
You know?
Yes. So to that end, I ended up taking that contract and I did go to my lawyer and say, what do you think about this? And it wasn't perfect. And so it was really helpful to get his perspective and his team's perspective to say, like, yes, but also it doesn't quite understand, like, it's just guessing. And so, yes, while this is technically correct, it actually isn't something that's done very often. And what is done is blank, and gave me suggestions for other things. But it was a good starting point for me to understand how to speak to my lawyer. And it gave me something way better to work off of that saved me time, which meant saving me money.
Yes, yes, indeed. And I
love
that.
Yes.
We
love that so much.
Save me time, save me money, save me energy, and allow me to relax.
Yes. Yes.
Yes. So Suki, you know, there are a lot of concerns around AI. We know what they are. Some of them are really valid. And, you know, we're not here to waylay anybody's concerns. We want to hear them all. I certainly, as a consultant, want to hear what people are saying. And that way we can have better dialogue around the discussions that we're having, you know, whether it's before Congress or, you know, with AI experts and software builders themselves. Let's address some of those concerns for our audience. Your work extends outside of Hollywood. So what would you say to people as we're talking about AI in a public space?
And well, first and foremost, I would say the fears are valid. So you have to understand that these things are coming into the public sphere as conversations because there's a lot to be worried about. And the fact that on top of all of the social inequities we are already dealing with, you're pouring the gasoline of like AI, artificial intelligence, alignment, and super intelligence, and who has access to that, and security, data risks, policing, biases that are already inherent in the system. There's a lot that we are already having to deal with right now outside of the purview of artificial intelligence being added as fuel to that fire. And so I would say the concerns are very valid, and it is actually unhelpful to ignore or pretend that those things don't exist. And yet, in the same way that when a kid comes into your room, you know, if you're baby, like if you have children or if you're babysitting or whatever, like you have a small child who's very afraid and says there's a monster in the closet, it's probably not the best idea to say, oh my God, where? And then hide, right? There's something really important about recognizing like, oh, this is a valid fear. How can we hold space for it? How can we recognize it and not let it drive our central nervous system? And so my orientation is to recognize the fear and ask, where is this fear coming from? And how do I want this fear to motivate me to learn more and educate myself? And so I would very much advise against taking the ostrich approach, which is seeing something that scares you and then saying like, oh my God, I hate this, so I'm never going to interact with it, and I'm going to stick with my head in the sand and hope that it goes away, because it's not going to go away. And the most helpful thing that we can do is to educate ourselves, learn as much as we can, so that we can see where does AI actually work for us in our lives, and where does it not work for us. And when we're having a conversation with someone, don't we want to know what the issues are and even what we want to advocate for on our behalf? If I'm engaging with an AI and I'm seeing where it's failing, I'm seeing where it's doing really well, I'm seeing what places in my own heart I start to feel like, ooh, this sounds a little bit too much like me, and I need to start to think about, how do I want to engage with emails from people, you know, from the outside? Like, how do I want to engage with media and communication from the outside? How do I want to think about AI in the world? It can be an avenue to be more mindful and thoughtful about the world abroad if we engage with it and if we ask questions about it. And so I think the fear is vital, and it is important to recognize, but not to let it be something that pushes us away from learning and away from expanding our worldview, but something that sort of pushes us in like hiding and making us feel like we don't want to engage with it. I think it's vital to learn and to have these conversations and to use it as often as possible, so that you know how to advocate for yourself and your needs in these systems.
Absolutely, Suki. I agree with you wholeheartedly. I've written several articles about artificial intelligence and how it's been used in various sectors and impacting business, government, civil society, you name it. And one of my bottom lines is that it's not going away. We've got to not only learn what it does, how we can leverage it, and then also address the concerns around, you know, the things that definitely need improvements. So you hit the nail on the head. Suki Madawi, thank you so much for being with us. You are an absolute rock star. We appreciate you for coming in today, all the way from Mauritius, by the way, a few days before your wedding. Congratulations.
Thank you very much.
Yes, yes. Suki's going to be back with us soon. So friends and family, viewers, you guys want to stay tuned. Thank you, Suki.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
If you or someone you know has been a victim of a data breach, account compromise, deep fakes, or digital impersonation fraud, be sure to contact your local police department or the FBI at ic3.gov. Also, be sure to visit our sponsor, Vicker Group, LLC, business consultants for Generation U at vickergroup.com for cybersecurity awareness training and other resources to protect you, your families, your businesses, and the community. Also, be sure to check out my column, InfoSector with V. Venisulia on Newsmax to get more info on AI's impact on business, government, politics, civil society, and more. If you'd like to sponsor the show, be a guest on the show, or have show ideas, feel free to contact us at dtbwithv.com. I want to thank the crew today: Doug, Suzanne, Zach, Jen, Stephen, and David. We couldn't do it without you. I'm your host, V. This is Down to Business with V. We'll see you next time.